that the Euromoney is resuming its activities in Cairo, it probably gives the sense that Egypt is going back to normality and business is likely to be as usual or much better than usual. I'm sure our Minister of Tourism is happy to see some of the foreigners in the room, and we would have liked Richard to bring a lot more people with him, but he was stingy this time. Let's hope 1 year from now we'll see a lot of foreigners along with our Egyptian investors, because at the end of the day, as far as I am concerned, investment is a function of what local investors do to begin with. Then FDI is always an add-on. Usually people say that economic growth is a function of domestic savings, how much savings you have at home, and that is the starting point. And if you have a saving investment gap, then you need FDI. And that comes in as a supplement, not as a substitute. Indeed, I do believe that what is going to happen, what will get that economy going, is domestic investors first, then hopefully foreign investors as well. Let me step back and tell you a little bit what I'm going to say. I gave a speech at the MCHAM something like a few weeks ago, where I gave them 3 reasons for why I'm optimistic about the Egyptian economy. Today I'm going to do something similar, but not quite the same. I'm going to put myself in your shoes, because many of you are investors, and ask myself, should I be investing in Egypt? I was optimistic there. I am suggesting that the answer is absolutely. And let me give you 3 reasons why that is the case. I mean, just before I give you the reasons, let me tell you that if you want to invest, you go to a country when it's on the downside, because it can go nowhere else other than up. And Egypt is going to be up. So it is a question of coming in now. It's a question of activating the economy now and planning for the future. But let me give you my real reasons why I should be investing in Egypt. The first one is derived from, which is counter the reports that you have been reading recently. Indeed, if you look at the reports that are coming out of international institutions, you will notice that the Global Competitiveness Report ranks Egypt at 118. That's a deterioration from the previous year, which was only 107. So Egypt is not doing very well. If you look at the Doing Business Report, Egypt in fact ranks at 128, compared with 109 in the previous year as well. So if I read these reports and then I read over and above the forecasts made by the IMF and the like, in fact, I would be very discouraged. But let me tell you what's wrong with these reports. That is not to bash anyone. None of these institutions, they are great institutions. But let me tell you what's wrong about these reports and what I read out of them. First, they look backward. In a way, what they are telling you is what has happened rather than what's likely to happen. They are giving you an assessment of what the economy went through, not what the economy is going to look like in the future. And indeed, we do know very well that the Egyptian economy at the end of June 30th of this year, all the indicators were actually not encouraging at all. I'm not surprised that these rankings are what they are. The economy suffered from at least 3 major problems. The first was macroeconomic imbalances, an enormously high budget deficit, 14% of GDP, that's just really beyond any acceptable levels. Shortages of all kinds, pressure in the pound, the dwindling international reserves, that's not a very good picture. At the same time, last year also, the economy grew at only 2.1%. That's really modest, especially when you think about creating jobs. To create jobs for something like 700,000, 800,000 new entrants into the labor market every year, you need at least a growth rate of 6-7%. Imagine when you have only 2%. Not only that you have a high unemployment rate, you actually have an increasing rate because you are unable to even deal with the new entrants. let alone those who are unemployed in the first place. That is not a good picture. The third major challenge that the economy was facing, and there was a very strong sense of that, is the idea of social injustice. Very frequently, the previous regime, the last 10 years or so, the economy actually was not doing too badly. It was growing on the average between 5 and 7%. The trouble was a question of who was getting the benefits. So there was a strong sense of a worsening distribution of income. Poverty was not necessarily declining dramatically. So this is not a very good picture. So I am not surprised that these reports about the state of the Egyptian economy are discouraging. But is that the case? Is that what's likely to happen in the future? We know from economics something I learned like 40 years ago. It's called how do you form expectations? And there are two ways of forming expectations. The first one is what they call adaptive expectations, and the second one is what they call perfect foresight. Adaptive expectations is basically the idea that you look at the past and you think about the future along the lines of what the past looked like. That is one way of thinking, and that is essentially what these reports are reflecting. They are reflecting the past. But there are other investors, there are other people who think otherwise. They think about the future, and they think about what the future is going to look like. And I'm going to suggest to you that the future is much better. So that is my first reason as to why you shouldn't be reading too much into reports that rely on the past. Rather, you would want to think about the future. Let me give you another reason why I think Egypt is an attractive place for investment opportunities and the future is better. And that has to do with basically what the Biblawis government has done so far. How did we think about dealing with these challenges that I have just described, and whether the results of the shift in policies is paying off or not. And let me tell it to you in the form of a story. When we arrived, we were confronted by an economy that's characterized the way I have just described. Macro imbalances, sluggish economic growth, high unemployment, increasing poverty, worsening income distribution, period. With the revolution, expectations are very high. You cannot settle for very little. And we had two choices of dealing with that. The first one is to say, well, look, I have to get my house in order, restore macroeconomic balances, tighten the belt, reduce expenditure, raise taxes, get our economy on track, then God will help us down the road. Once you stabilize, then the situation will become more attractive and investment will take place and the rest of it. But that is going to take too long. We couldn't afford to do that. We couldn't afford an austerity program. We couldn't afford an IMF program that is associated with tightening the belt. That is not the only objective we wanted to pursue. We wanted to activate the economy. We wanted to achieve macro stability, but simultaneously we wanted to be responsive to the social demands. How did we think about doing that? It is the alternative. It is the expansionary fiscal and monetary policy. And that is indeed the track we have taken. We are not irresponsible, such that we go for expansionary fiscal and monetary policy and sacrificing macroeconomic balances and increasing budget deficit and leave a bigger problem for the next government and the following governments to come. So we wanted to do it responsibly. We wanted to do it also in a way that deals with social demands. And that was the puzzle. How do you do that? We knew that the only way to get out of it is basically to get resources from outside. The idea, when you have a sluggish economy, you have a flat supply curve, you can increase demand without increasing prices or increasing inflation. That is what we know from Keynesian economics, right? So the question is, how do you increase demand? Do you increase demand under normal circumstances by increasing exports, by attracting FDI, by getting higher remittances, by getting tourists back? This is how you do it under normal circumstances. Unfortunately, or fortunately for that matter, we are not going through normal circumstances. So we needed fresh money from outside. And it was a bit difficult to do so. And we were lucky enough that the Gulf decided for strategic reasons that they want to support Egypt through the transition. We're grateful for their support. But indeed, it did help us begin implementing the policies that we believe are the right policies for that economy at that particular point in time. It doesn't mean that this choice is a permanent choice. Doesn't mean it's the right solution for all times, in all circumstances. Not true. It is what is appropriate for us right now. To make sure that the resources that we have gotten, or gotten the commitment for $12 billion are wisely spent, we made sure that the expansion is into infrastructure, public investment in infrastructure. Why is that so? One, because it has a growth dividend down the road. Two, it's because it's activating the economy in the short run. Three, it is supposed to crowd in the private sector rather than crowd out the private sector. So not only are we activating the economy now, we are making sure that subsequent governments are going to have an easier time than the one we had to deal with. In the meantime, we try to pay attention to some of the social demands that are justified, right? It's not reasonable enough. I mean, I remember a story, I might have repeated, I might have said it before in front of some of you, but bear with me. Somebody asked the Brazilian Prime Minister, how was Brazil doing at one point in time when Brazil was doing extremely well on the growth agenda. He told them, Brazil is doing very well, Brazilians are not. Why? Because economic growth was very high, but income distribution in Brazil was the worst in the world. We don't want to have that. We want to make sure that we have a strategy that caters both for economic growth, expanding the cake, but simultaneously worrying about who is getting the benefits. Now, how do we translated that into a set of policies, but the only point I want to make now, and I can get questions on some of the other things about it afterwards, is that, how am I doing with time, Richard? Still have 10 minutes? Okay, good. All right. No, it's my pleasure. I can spend my next 10 minutes asking you questions rather than having to say anything on my part. That would be an easy way out. Let me not do that. I would say that we had a package of policies, the features of which is what I have just described. Translated into actions, we had a stimulus package that includes in the first part of it something like 30 billion pounds, mostly in public infrastructure, but some of it goes to the health sector. Some of it has to do with some of the social programs, like a meal for students who in school and so on and so forth. That might appear to be popular, but indeed it is well deserved. And in fact, it is an attempt in the short run to deal with some imbalances that have been there for quite some time. Let me tell you the following up front. We are not claiming that we are going to resolve all the problems of the Egyptian economy in the next few months. This is the lifetime of this government. Rather, what we really are hoping to or aspiring to achieve is fix some of the problems now, put the economy in track, introduce some of the policies that are immediately needed, and beyond that, prepare the ground for subsequent governance. There are quite a few programs that we are working on that we are not going to see as a government see the benefits from these programs. But we think that the future governments, and more importantly the Egyptian people, are going to benefit from these activities. So let me not give you a laundry list because that will take some time. Let me just make one point which has to do with how does it look like. People tell you that this government has been in office for 4 months, and they actually think about it as if we have been here for 40 years. I mean, it's only 4 months after all. You don't turn a big ship around in 4 months. It takes some time to get the economy going. But at least on the basis of what has been done, we know in principle that the financial sector adjusts much faster than the real economy. That's a principle that applies everywhere, not only in Egypt. Usually you make a change in policy, the impact appears much faster in the financial sector than it does in the real economy. And that is indeed what's happening. In the last few months alone, international reserves are up, the pound is not under attack, or is relatively stable. The black market is all but disappeared. The central bank decided to reduce the interest rate twice, That has translated into lower cost of borrowing for the Ministry of Finance. If you are investing into our treasury bills, you would notice that we are paying you a little less than before. By doing that, we are planning to reduce the budget deficit to 10% rather than 14% of GDP, and that is going to leave more resources in the banking system for the private sector to borrow. And all these are signs that are concrete, they are apparent, it's very hard to miss. That's the financial sector impact. When it comes to the real side of the economy, it takes time for contractors to get the money, for government, the Ministry of Finance to give it to the different ministries to give it to announce the bids, people to apply. Anyway, it takes time for that to take place. But we expect that the next few months are going to see a lot of activities in the real side of the economy, starting probably with the construction sector. But hopefully that will find its way to other sectors in the economy as well. So that is basically, on the social side, of course, you know that we have done the minimum wage. We have done some of these social programs that I told you about. We have been talking for years about what we can do about our doctors. We go to the hospitals and doctors are getting, what, 800 pounds a month or something. The guy studies for 7 years or 8 years, I'm not sure. And then at the end of the day, they're starting off salaries about 800 pounds. That's just not a way of providing a medical service, a good medical service to people, especially when you go to public hospitals. So in any case, there were a few things that we did decide deliberately to work on. On the fiscal policies in particular, we are putting into effect the real estate tax. We've been having negotiations or discussions with our friends in the Federation of Egyptian Industries, in the Chamber of Commerce, the tourism, and so on. We are trying to basically, we change some of the rules to make it acceptable, transparent, people feeling comfortable with it, and that is something we have done. We are moving from the sales tax into the value-added tax. Our plan is that at a time when you want to activate the economy, this is not the time where you want to impose new higher taxes, much higher taxes. Maybe there is a time and a place for everything, but that's not the time to impose heavy new taxes to finance a deficit. We want to be consistent with ourselves. We don't want to be doing one thing in one direction and then doing something else that contradicts that and basically hold the wagon from moving. That's not a sensible, fully integrated set of policies. On the expenditure side, our biggest challenge is going to be the energy subsidy. And this government is committed to start dealing with the energy subsidy. We know this is a problem that has been accumulating over a long period of time. It is not sensible at all to shock the economy by introducing a dramatic major change in the energy subsidy in no time. It's not acceptable neither politically, socially, or even on the economic side. You cannot shock the economy too dramatically, so there is a plan that's going to be phased out over a number of years, and this government is committed to begin implementing the first steps in that program. Let me move on to my last reason. I told you 2 reasons so far. It took me a long time, but let me be very short on the third one. I would argue that the future of Egypt is going to be much better than the past. I am completely convinced that sustained economic progress in any country is a function of politics. It's not a function of economic policies. Economic policies is important, but they are not the ones who make it or break it. I think good political institutions is what makes governments able to make credible commitments, is what makes people feel that their property rights are going to be protected. It is what will make sure that the representatives of the people in government are the ones that are responding to the diverse demands of various groups in society. It is what sustains welfare. If you don't believe me, just think about North and South Korea. We know that one of them is doing much better than the other. and we know that economic systems. There is one book that I'm very fond of, and I invite all of you to read. It's called Why Nations Fail, and it's by two guys. One is Darren Ashimoglu, and the other one is James Robinson. People look for different explanations of why countries fail and why countries succeed, and they come to the conclusion that it is really the political system more than anything else. Egypt is going through a political transition. We have a roadmap. This roadmap, I hope, is the beginning of establishing these so-called inclusive political institutions that will enable this country to take off. No visitor, no friend of mine visited Egypt without asking one question. Egypt deserves better than it has. And that is over the last 15 years or so. It is not a question of, it's a question of potential. This economy, this country deserves better, and I think we are going to get it. Thank you.